Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Tech Talks podcast, TV industry podcast from the Broadcast Tech team. My name's Jake Bickerton and I'm the editor of Broadcast Tech magazine. Today we're talking through the BBC's plans for Wimbledon 2021 with Ron Chakraborty.
Ron, we had a chat about a year ago about
yeah.
and then the plans. Then you're having to sort of adapt very quickly. I just listened to the podcast again actually and jotted down some notes about exactly what you had to do last year. It's quite ambitious. It sounded really good, and you still had how many hours of content? 50 hours of programming you managed to do over that fortnight as well. It's really good.
It was a quite enjoyable fortnight to be. We were down at Wimbledon actually. Even just to be down there at all was nice. To be at Wimbledon for a fortnight, but actually you almost felt like you were privileged because we were one of the few people around. It was a bit surreal, looking at the rest of the All England club and nobody there, and we had this little sort of corner to ourselves. But then, it was crazy because we had to reduce the amount of people we had on site. So, I was doing all sorts of stuff from printing out running orders to literally, Boris Becker would rock up and the first thing I had to do was temperature test him rather than shake his hand. So, it was bonkers. But I think we just really enjoyed the fact that we did it and we managed to offer the Wimbledon fans something, even if it was a bit of nostalgia, to fill their summer. So it was an interesting one. It's one I won't forget, definitely.
At least this year it's relatively business as usual, to some degree anyway. I want to talk about the plans for this year and any innovations. So I had a little bit of info from you about the kind of broadcast side being linear TV. Obviously you got live streams as well, presumably on the website, and I don't know if there's any red button stuff. You've got lots of stuff happening on social media platforms, and then on the production side there was a studio, wasn't there, a bit of a virtual studio happening as part of your presentation, which sounds really interesting as well. And then obviously all of the sort of challenges around, working in a COVID safe environment and all that kind of stuff. So, I don't know where you wanted to sort of kick off in terms of, where's the starting point for this year?
I suppose the start, in terms of the planning, that is the challenge. I mean, I look after two things this summer, the Olympics and Wimbledon. In both cases, it's all about being flexible. I think we've all got used to having to plan these things remotely and we're not all together, and we try and, make the best of that as we can. But when you're so reliant on what government regulations are going to be, the amount of times I've heard on both events, we think this will be the plan, but things might change between now and there. The goalpost might shift. So therefore, I'd be ready for plan B or plan C at the same time. And even something like the crowds at Wimbledon, they're working around 25% capacity. But depending on the results of the government's event research program and how these 2 rounds of football have gone and the world snooker and everything else, that might change. But that decision doesn't come till the 21st of June, a week before. So centre court and number one court could be working at 25% capacity, or they could be at 70% capacity or even more. So that's going to be a late decision we have to rely on. But the club said all the way that to let the broadcast centre, we have to stick with the social distancing rules, the setup we've put in. There's no kind of last minute scramble to bring in dozens more people. And we totally understood that. It would just be slightly chaotic if we all changed our plans with a week to go. So, that was an interesting one because that broadcast centre, it was built, good 20 plus years ago. And some parts of it, they're still absolutely fine. But other parts of it, certainly from a COVID point of view, aren't great. There's one stairwell that takes you up to the roof and down to the basement, and it's pretty tight in places. So I think the club have had to build a separate staircase, one way up, one way down, sort of thing. And then similarly, our office spaces, a long time ago, I wouldn't say they were ever comfortable, but the more we've added, social media and more stuff in, they're quite cramped, and everyone's sort of right next to each other. And suddenly we have to bring in social distancing. And where we did have, I think it was 21 desks across the two offices we got, I think we're down to 10 now. So we then had to work out, how many of those people we really, really do need to have at Wimbledon, and if they do, where can we put them? But if they can't, well, what can we do back in Salford? So that was kind of almost the starting point, was how many people can we have down there, how many people are absolutely essential to it, and then work it around there. And the club have been really good with that. They did a kind of survey amongst all their rights holders to say, look, how many of you are coming and what sort of numbers are you bringing? So they had a clear picture very early in the year of basically how many people had to cater for in the broadcast centre, and therefore how much space was available. Because and that was useful because I think a broadcast like the Tennis Channel decided to massively reduce their numbers. They were obviously worried about international travel. So that then opened up more space for broadcasters like us, but also the host operation, because, and I was talking about our offices, but there is one office where all the commentators sit together in between matches and before play starts. That room wasn't, COVID safe, if you like, so they had to create 3 commentators rooms as well. So that overall kind of planning part of it, before we even got to the broadcast plans and the studio, that's been the major headache. And I'm sure things will continue to change a little bit, but I don't think we'll be talking about goalpost moving. It'll be plans or plan Bs and plan Cs that we had already discussed and that we then implement depending on how the world is.
So tell me a bit about the virtual studio, because the year before, there was a virtual studio set up for some of the post-match interviews, wasn't there? It was entirely sort of green screen, but with the real-time Unreal Engine graphics. Is this a similar sort of thing this year?
More and more people are embracing the virtual studios now, looking at the technology. Say they're so much better than the virtual studios of 20, 30 years ago. They're all a bit clunky. If you're old enough to remember the adventure game, that's sort of bad.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's that sort of thing. But now, literally, you are staring at them, going, actually, that is virtual, isn't it? But with Wimbledon, we had to sort of tread carefully, because we knew that studio backdrop is great, and it actually shows that we're there. So we didn't want to mess with that too much. I mean, literally, if you said, "Oh, the BBC's come down to Wimbledon," and we've always had this great shot where Sue Barker sits with Wimbledon in the background, and we're going to go with a virtual studio. So we're like, why are you doing that? But actually, we just thought, is there a way we can get the best of both worlds here and actually virtually expand the size of the studio instead? So on one side, we've got a big screen where we can do analysis, but we can also do the draw, which is always a difficult thing, especially in the early days, to try and represent the kind of 128 players and so on. But the other side, we've just gradually brought it into a it's a very nice looking space. They called it a light well. Basically, it is, there's a skylight. There's all the sort of in keeping with Wimbledon, the sort of brickwork and the ivy and so on. So
Nice.
We can use that as a separate presentation space as well. So suddenly we've got kind of 3 potential options around the studio, whereas before we just had the one around Sue. And given that we've got to think about social distancing as well, just having the extra space virtually should hopefully be a really nice addition to the coverage this year.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you've kind of essentially got green screen left and right of the kind of main bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
fantastic. And so that's the innovations around presentation. We've talked about the kind of production side and how many people you're getting there, and the kind of adaptations that have to be made for COVID. So when it comes to the broadcast side and where it's going out to, naturally linear TV still, are there any additions into the kind of platforms or OTT or anything like that you're doing this year?
No additions this year. It's still that kind of accessible area thing that we do have all 18 courts streamed. So which is really popular in the early days, actually, to be honest, because when you've got lots of British players playing and they might not be on 1 or 2, they might not be on the main, so they might be out and about somewhere. To be able to follow their progress is so welcome to our viewers. So that part of it's brilliant. Obviously the UHD really came into its own, I think, with the final a couple of years ago now, that Federer Djokovic. You always find that there is a sort of a percentage of an overall viewership that goes UHD, and I think if it's your usual kind of 2-3 million, then you'll get 30,000-40,000. But because that final got 9.5 million peak, the numbers for UHD were absolutely fantastic as well. So I think it was a great advert for it, and hopefully more and more people are getting used to their most elite sport being in UHD. So I think that'll be picked up a lot more this year as well.
And is that going to be through iPlayer? Is it the UHD?
Yeah.
And all of the kind of multiple games at the same time, is that all through iPlayer?
I think iPlayer will be the place for everything.
Yeah.
But Red Button still does really, really well. So we just got to manage how we juice that and at what level. I think we're just going to make sure that the pickup on iPlayer is kind of reflective of people migrating there and not sticking with the Red Button.
And then additional camera positions. Are you doing anything different this year compared to other years?
I think, well, to be honest, we are doing a few things differently, but it's almost been COVID driven in a way, because the platform what we do today at Wimbledon, I don't know if you remember the most recent one was a nice little platform overlooking number one court at the top of the grounds. That was just too tight. You wouldn't get a presenter and two guests in there socially distanced. So again, Wimbledon Broadcast Services have brought in a bigger platform that ESPN and us will share. And again, the timings work nicely that we can do. If we wanted to do our opening there, we can do it. The whole place can be wiped down and sanitized. And then ESPN tend to do the afternoons there till 5. Right. Then it can be wiped down again. And then we come back for our highlights at 8. So it's really well utilized. And obviously, it's another good spot for us. Similarly, there's other broadcast positions. I wish I could give it a more posh name, but it's the facilities building roof, basically. Used to have 3 slots in it, but it's only got the 1 now. So as a result, we can spread out a bit. And that's got a great view looking back towards centre court and effectively looking back towards where the player lifts the trophy in front of the crowds after they've won it. So that's another one. And then, apart from that, it's the usual. We'll try and be on centre court where we can. Again, we just have to mind our social distancing. And again, we usually do a couple of days on the members lawn as well when it's sort of one of the grand days, other than the middle Saturday where all the great stars of sport are on, or the final weekend as well. So it's brilliant that we could, how many events can you say that we can present from half a dozen places all around the venue, just to give you a different different perspective, but also a kind of access all areas kind of feel to it, which is brilliant. Wimbledon Broadcast Services have added a lot of fantastic elements to the coverage as well. The big wire cam they use, rail cam. I think they've extended that as well this year, and it offers brilliant shots all the way along the sort of the southern courts, south of centre, all the way across up to number 1. So we were so pleased with that last year, and they were really kind of helpful when it came to offering it to broadcasters at certain times. We would want it, beginning of play. So suddenly the BBC had it exclusively, and you could see 2 of the guys in the background. But then ESPN might want it at other parts of the day. We'll give it to them. And then we're in the middle of a big match on centre court. They'd switch it so that the centre court director could have it. So that was a really good addition as well. That was a Wimbledon Broadcast Services one.
And what about for the UHD stuff then? Because are these additional camera positions, are they all UHD to give the option for when you want to flip it? No,
what we do is, so UHD, at the moment it's just centre court. I think Wimbledon, again, it's to be a Wimbledon Broadcast Service. They have, I'm sure they'll have long-term plans to move, upgrade Court 1 to UHD and then look beyond that. But what we do with our UHD coverage is basically cut between our BBC One presentation. So between matches, you'll get Sue and the guests, but upgraded from HD. Yeah. Is it upgrade? Is that the phrase I'm looking for?
Up-resed, I think, isn't it?
Up-resed, yeah. So that basically you're not seeing the players walk off and then a wide angle for 10 minutes. You are feeling more of a program. So we try and just glue that program together a little bit more, so it just feels like a slick kind of broadcast offering rather than just a feed of the court. So that's how we make that one work. I'd be interested to see how we make it work with the other courts when they eventually get upgraded. But it's a nice offering at the moment. It's been one of those years where getting Wimbledon at all just feels like a bit of a success in a way. I think just getting Wimbledon as we know it is taking a lot of work, and that's the same with every event. I think having the additional element of the studio and just having Wimbledon back, I think it's it left a big hole in the summer last year. I think people will just be so pleased to see the green grass of the courts, feel the strawberries and cream, all that sort of effort. See the Federers and the Serenas and the Murrays and the Nadals and so on. Just seeing those guys again, it's just that another little step back to normality that you're feeling with all the sporting events at the moment. But Wimbledon, because it's kind of beyond the sporting event, is kind of part of the British summer. I think it'll be really nice to have that back. It's a really special moment, I think.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a rating on your podcast provider. I'll see you next time for the next episode in the Broadcast Tech Talk series.